Written with the kanji for Oni head and pronounced Onikobe, a wide basin spread out at the foot of Mount Onikobe. And in that basin, you could find a small farming village, Onikobe Village. Grandpa Rokusuke lived by himself in a house on the village outskirts. He knew all sorts of interesting stories from the old days, and he always had a new story for me whenever I went to visit. One day, with only a week left of the long summer holidays, I went over to his house with Niwa-kun. Niwa-kun wasn't from the village. He only visited during the summer holidays to stay with relatives. He was about the same age as me and had a beautiful face, somewhat like a girl. We played together every day over the previous 2 weeks. Upset that we would soon have to say goodbye, I decided to introduce him to Grandpa Rokusuke. "This is Rokusuke-san's house?" Niwa-kun asked me, his voice as clear and beautiful as his face. Grandpa Rokusuke's house had a thatched roof and a well in the garden, an old-fashioned type of house that you couldn't even see in the village anymore. It was no doubt a strange sight to the city boy Niwa-kun. Grandpa Rokusuke was basking in the sun, as he always did. When he noticed us peeking over the hedge, he waved the fan in his right hand. "Oh, it's you! Don't just stand there. Come inside." "And who's this unfamiliar face?" Grandpa Rokusuke said to Niwa-kun. "I'm Niwa Shirao," Niwa-kun answered. "Niwa Shirao?" "Yeah, the characters mean to possess a good will." He blushed as he explained. "What a strange name, huh?" "No, not at all." "So, you possess a good will, huh, Shirao-kun?" "I reckon that's a great name." Grandpa Rokusuke smiled. "Niwa-kun is here to play for the summer holidays. We're friends," I added from the side. Grandpa Rokusuke looked over both of us and narrowed his eyes. "Niwa-kun really is a city kid, huh? Look at that handsome face. Please be good friends with my boy. Even though he's just a kid, he's always busting in here, so I was worried he didn't have any friends." He lightly hit the top of my head with the fan in his right hand. Niwa-kun broke into a slight smile at Grandpa Rokusuke's words. His handsome face filled with an indescribable colour. It was like he looked like an adult, or like he knew something. It was an expression I couldn't imitate. We went inside and chatted about this and that, and then I got down to business. "Grandpa Rokusuke, do you have another story for us?" "What type of story? I've told you so many." A scary story for the summer. I brought Niwa-kun all this way, so tell us a really good one." Pestering him, I smiled, and Grandpa Rokusuke spoke decisively. "Well then, let me tell you a real special story." "Is it scary?" "You betcha. And even more so, because it's true." He whispered, his voice full of feeling. "Awesome!" I got excited. Niwa-kun's eyes glistened as well. Even though he sighed, Grandpa Rokusuke seemed drawn in by our enthusiasm and started talking. This all happened when I was still just around your age. Written with the kanji for Oni head and pronounced Onikobe, a wide basin spread out at the foot of Mount Onikobe. And in that basin, you could find a small village dotted with old houses. It was Onikobe village. Rokusuke lived alone with his parents in a house on the village outskirts. His father was the village chief of Onikobe village. And perhaps because of that, their house was larger than the others and clearly stood out. One hot summer night, Rokusuke waited for his parents to fall asleep and then snuck out of the house. Holding his breath so as not to make a sound, he made his way for the shed in the corner of the yard. In a dark corner of the shed, he had hidden his father's hatchet and a dusty old sleeping bag. He picked them up and listened closely. He couldn't hear a thing. All was well. Bathed in the light of the sparkling full moon, Rokusuke snuck his way over towards Mount Onikobe. The village houses ended, and at the start of the narrow trail leading up to the mountain stood a single sign. Beware of wild boars. Children are not to climb the mountain. 3 shadows stood by the sign. There was Shinnosuke, a lanky boy, already a head taller than Rokusuke. Then there was the chubby Santa, who was around the same height as him. And Sakichi, who was smaller than Rokusuke. All 3 were his friends. Rokusuke, you're late. Although he whispered, Santa's voice reached him clearly through the night sky. Like him, all 3 boys held sleeping bags under their arms. Rokusuke was the only one holding a hatchet. My dad went to bed late. Whatever. Shinnosuke cut him off with a sharp voice. Well then, let's go to the Oni Hall. Shinnosuke's voice, fraught with tension, again became harsh, like his expression. With his hatchet, Rokusuke took the lead, and the 4 boys started their way up Mount Onikobe. The animal trail they followed was barely enough to call a path, but it was better than nothing. Little moonlight made it through, cut off by the dense trees above. The 4 boys walked in silence, barely able to see. Finally, Sakichi said from the rear, Do you think we'll see any wild boars? His voice full of worry. Shinnosuke answered without stopping. What? Are you scared? If so, then you can go back home alone. His tone was mean. Pushing through the thick weeds, the 4 boys continued walking towards the Oni Hall. Sakichi, if you're scared of wild boars, then how do you plan on spending the night in the Oni Hall? You know the Kido appears there, right? The overweight and out of shape Santa said, already out of breath. There were rumors of what they called Kido, an Oni child, appearing at the Oni Hall halfway up Mount Onikobe. In reality, they had never even seen the hall. But all 4 boys had heard of it from their parents. The child of an Oni appears in the Oni Hall. A scary child. Dokusuke, you must never climb Mount Onikobe. It's no place for children. Do you want the Kido to eat you, Dokusuke? Dokusuke remembered how the adults used to try to scare him. What would happen if his father found out? Would he make him sit Seiza style on the wooden floor again? Dokusuke continued walking in the lead while pondering such thoughts. Gradually, his eyes got used to the darkness. They all continued to walk in silence. The person breathing roughly had to be Santa. Walking, walking, walking. Just as Dokusuke's feet started to hurt, he heard a scream from behind. Wait! It was Santa. Hey! Wait! You guys! Wait! Santa was lagging far behind. Struggling to breathe, he staggered desperately after his friends. Man, he's useless. The tall Shinnosuke shrugged his shoulders. Dokusuke and Sakichi also gave a small laugh. Then, 10 meters behind them, Santa screamed again. Hey! I can hear something! The other 3 boys listened closer. They couldn't hear a thing. I don't hear anything. Dokusuke's voice was drowned out by Santa's scream. Something's coming this way! I can't hear a thing, Dokusuke was about to say again, when it happened. Yeah, I definitely hear something too. Shinnosuke frowned. Was it the wind? The grass rustled creepily like waves. Maybe it's a wild boar, Sakichi whispered, his voice full of worry. Dokusuke unconsciously gripped the handle of his axe tighter. Rustle, rustle. It had to be the wind, right? Rustle, 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 rustle. The sound gradually got faster. It was getting closer. Run! Santa screamed on the verge of tears. The 4 boys ran up the darkening animal trail like a bullet. The suspicious sound followed them as they ran blindly. There it is! Someone screamed. Suddenly everything opened up before them, and the white moon shone down. An old wooden building sat in the cozy open space. It was the Oni Hall. Then both doors suddenly opened, as though being blown open by the wind. Inside the gaping mouth of the hall was nothing but darkness. But there was nowhere else to go. The 4 boys tumbled inside and closed the door behind them. There's a lock! Sakichi screamed in delight and, with a creak, locked the bolt behind the door. There wasn't a single window in the hall. Darkness enveloped the boys. They listened closely. All they could hear was each other's rough breathing. They could no longer hear the sound that was chasing them. Nobody said a word. The atmosphere was so tense, they feared it might tear their own skin open. Maybe that thing outside might break the door down and push its way inside. What was that thing? Both darkness and fear surrounded the boys. What on earth was that sound? Someone asked, as their eyes finally adjusted to the darkness. It was Sakichi, as he squatted on the ground with his back to the door. "It was just a wild boar," Rokusuke whispered, lowering his axe and sitting cross-legged on the floor. Maybe it was the kiddo. Shinnosuke's voice was so sharp that Sakichi and Rokusuke looked at each other, and then he grinned. As for Santa, he lay on the ground, struggling to catch his breath. "I can't move. But I can't be bothered to go back either, so I'm just gonna live here now." He joked, but he was also exhausted. It was true, if they tried to descend the mountain now, it would no doubt be tough for Santa. "The kiddo will eat you," Shinnosuke said again in a terrifying voice to Santa. But unlike the cowardly Sakichi, Santa was far more laid back, and the words did little to scare him. "What are you talking about? Sounds like a big fat lie to me," he said as though it were nothing. A world with no light. A world with no sound. A world with no adults. For the boys, their little summer night adventure was proving to be incredibly fun. They'd snuck out of home during the night and climbed the Forbidden Mountain. And now they were inside the hall, wrapped in darkness and looking at each other. The mountain at night was so quiet, it was like they were the only 4 people in the entire world. They shivered with excitement. With no one to interrupt them in the hall, the boys chatted to their heart's content. They had endless topics to talk about. The boys took turns chatting. They talked about their teachers and meddling parents, stories of brave warriors, and stories of girls, although they might have been fake. Then they broke out their extra special, scary stories. At some point, all 4 boys had gotten into their sleeping bags and laid down on the dusty floor. Sleepiness washed over Rokusuke and his friends, like a slight fever. One by one, the 4 boys fell into the abyss of sleep. Finally, it was morning. A scream tore through the silence of the early morning. It was Santa. What on earth had happened? The boys slowly opened their heavy eyelids. Rokusuke realized it was morning in the dim light of the hall. Last night That was right. They had intended to stay up all night. Yet it seemed they had fallen asleep. Rokusuke crawled out of his sleeping bag. Shinnosuke also got up next to him. Rubbing their eyes, the boys looked around. Rays from the morning sun filtered through the gap in the door. That was why it was so dim. And in that dim light, they saw it lying at the bottom of the door. Rokusuke and Shinnosuke both screamed so loud that they feared their lungs might burst. It was Sakichi. He wasn't alive. He was dead. No, to phrase it more correctly, he had been killed. His eyes lay open and seemed to gawk at them. White foam trickled from his open mouth. In his tiny chest stood Dokusuke's axe, coated in blood. Time seemed to freeze around them. It was like the sight of Sakichi's dead body had enchanted the other three boys, and they were unable to tear their eyes away from him. Shinnosuke was the first to finally move. He walked over to Sakichi's dead body and tried to drag him away. Yet Shinnosuke was too thin and not strong enough to move Sakichi's seemingly heavy body. He didn't budge an inch. Seeing this, Santa was the next to make his move. He was confident in his strength, and although it moved slowly, he was able to move the body. He put Sakichi back down beside the door. Dokusuke was the only one who couldn't move. He was unable to tear his eyes off the horrific sight of Sakichi, and then he spoke in a tiny, trembling voice. Is he dead? Santa nodded silently. Shinnosuke suddenly stood up and flung the doors open. Fresh morning air flowed in with the bright rays of sun that lit up Sakichi's dead body. Uah! It was Shinnosuke who screamed. He bolted out of the hall and ran straight for the animal trail they'd followed up. His lanky back got smaller and smaller as he ran back down the mountain. Dokusuke and Santa looked at each other before running after him. The kiddo. As he ran as fast as he could down the path, struggling for breath, that word appeared in the back of his mind. The kiddo must have killed Sakichi. They could hear birds in the distance of the calm mountain, like nothing had changed. It was like they were the only ones who had been severed from reality. A morning haze coated the mountain, and the plants were covered in dew. Dokusuke and Santa ran side by side down the animal trail. Why had Sakichi been killed? He'd been so full of life just the day before. He was cowardly like always, sure, but they'd all exchanged words like normal. Now he was dead. Maybe it was because they were running downhill, or maybe it was because he was thinking of Sakichi, but the bottom of the mountain seemed so far away to Dokusuke. Grandpa Dokusuke stopped and let out a slow sigh. For a moment, I couldn't open my mouth. I'd heard something I shouldn't have. That was how I felt. I was born and raised in this village, but I'd never once heard of a murder taking place on Mount Onikobe. Nor had I heard anything about an Oni Hall or Kiddo. It was the first time I'd heard any of these terms. Perhaps they had become forbidden to speak of in the village after the incident with Sakichi. And now, I'd heard that forbidden story. I didn't think Grandpa Dokusuke was lying, but I had to ask him. I don't think you're kidding, but did that really happen here, in this village? Grandpa Dokusuke nodded, his expression stiff. So then, what happened to Sakichi-san? Niwa-kun asked. Even his clear voice hardened. Grandpa Dokusuke crossed his arms and slowly closed his eyes. Yes, the story isn't over yet. Then he started talking again. As they descended the mountain, the village was thankfully still quiet. Dokusuke returned home and dove into bed, but he couldn't get those images out of his head, and thus he couldn't sleep. When he closed his eyes, he saw Sakichi's dead body. That horrid sight with the axe sticking out of his chest. The axe? At that moment, Dokusuke realized something terrible. The axe and his sleeping bag. He'd left them both behind. The axe sticking out of Sakichi's chest was Dokusuke's father's. He had taken it to the Oni Hall just in case. And it wasn't just him. Shinnosuke and Santa had left their sleeping bags behind as well. They had been so shaken at the time that they didn't even think of them. His father always cut wood in the evening, after the day's farm work was done. He had to get the axe back before then. Plus the sleeping bags. If they could just do that, there would be no proof that they'd been there the night before. It frightened him to go back there, but if he didn't, he would be a suspect in Sakichi's murder. And that was even worse. At the time, Dokusuke was only thinking of protecting himself. Shinnosuke and Santa felt the same. When Dokusuke was done eating breakfast, his mind elsewhere, the other two boys showed up, their faces pale. Dokusuke, if you've got enough time to play, then come and help me out. His father called out from the farm, but the three boys nodded silently at each other and once again started their way towards the mountain. The path leading up Mount Onikobe was out of the way, so even during the day, there were few people there. As such, the boys were able to sneak in unseen. The three boys climbed dejectedly back up the path they'd run down that morning. Is Sakichi really dead? Shinnosuke asked timidly, very unlike him. Why did he die? I can't believe it. Santa's voice sounded pathetic as well. Dokusuke remained quiet the whole time. The weight of their hopelessness sank over them as they climbed the mountain. What were they supposed to do with Sakichi's dead body? They couldn't just leave him there like that. Not to mention the adults. They couldn't keep quiet about it forever. The three boys nearly burst into tears. Climbing the mountain several days in a row seemed to be affecting the unfit Santa. He struggled to breathe the entire time, and each step took concerted effort not to fall over. And yet he still didn't complain once, even though he was soaked in sweat. He continued climbing in silence. Then, once again, the three boys stood before the Oni Hall. That hall seemed cozy the night before, but in the light of day, it just looked like an old, run-down shed. Just as they had the night before, the doors rattled with each gust of strong wind, opening and closing. The doors were opening and closing? That could mean only one thing. Namely, the thing blocking the doors was gone. There was no way. Sakichi's dead body was supposed to be next to the door. Noticing this, the three boys rushed for the hall. There was nothing inside. Not Sakichi's dead body, not the axe, not their sleeping bags, nothing. The only thing that remained was the puddle of Sakichi's blood on the dusty floor. "What is this?" Shinnosuke screamed hysterically. Santa's mouth gaped open. They had no idea what was going on. Kido. That single word flared to life in Nokusuke's head. He wanted to get away from that awful place as soon as possible, but they had to let Santa rest for a moment. He was exhausted from all the running up and down the mountain. He didn't possess the endurance to make the return trip so quickly. A short while later, the three descended the mountain, their eyes glued to their feet the whole time, and the rest of the day passed in silence and gloom. Nokusuke spent the day wandering around near the veranda. As the night wore on, he kept waking up from bad dreams. Come to think of it, they hadn't got the axe back yet. Nokusuke panicked and dropped down from the veranda. But, fortunately, you might say, there was no time for that. As Nokusuke wandered around, the village erupted as people realized Sakichi was missing. Yet no matter where they searched, they were unable to find him, and all they found was the puddle of blood left in the Oni Hall. And that was the end of that. Yes, that's what the adults were thinking. The Kido must have eaten him. Nokusuke's father explained to him, and he never forgot his next words. And if you don't want to be next, you must never climb Mount Onikobe. Of course, that wasn't what the adults really thought. How sad. Sakichi must have been attacked by a wild animal on the mountain. That was the commonly held view in the grown-up world. Yet the truth remained a mystery. It was a dark, painful tale. Grandpa Nokusuke let out a long sigh when he was done. He muttered to himself, "Even if they all forget, I never will. That mystery still hasn't been solved. Why was Sakichi killed? I refuse to pass on until I know why." As his expression softened, Grandpa Nokusuke looked at both Niwa-kun and I. "What do you boys think?" The hall had no windows, and the only way in or out was through the sliding doors. And those doors had been locked with a bolt. Which meant Sakichi-san had been killed by a human. The bolt was on the door, so no wild animal could have gotten in. And as for a Kido, setting aside Grandpa Nokusuke's generation, there was no way a modern kid like me could believe in that. "I think the killer was human," I said, but that was all I knew. Either way, it wasn't a recent accident. Most of the people involved in it were dead, and the Oni Hall no longer existed either. There was no way to investigate it now. When I pointed that out, Grandpa Nokusuke grunted noncommittally. "I thought the same thing at the time. I even tried investigating it myself." Then he started his testimony from that time. A week after the incident, Dokusuke met with Shinnosuke and Santa to discuss what they remembered of the night. This was what the three remembered. Dokusuke's story. Dokusuke saw Sakichi leaving the hall as everyone started drifting off to sleep. Then, Shinnosuke followed him and left the hall too. He found this suspicious, yet he was sleepy, so he didn't call out to them. He fell asleep after that, so he didn't remember much else. But he did see Sakichi lying by the door when he woke up during the night. The next time he woke up was when Santa screamed upon discovering Sakichi's dead body. Shinnosuke's story. Shinnosuke saw Sakichi leaving the hall as everyone started drifting off. Something seemed to be controlling him, and concerned about his oddly blank look, Shinnosuke followed him. But when he left the hall, Sakichi was nowhere to be seen. He did a lap of the hall, but he was too scared to search the forest in the dark, so he went back inside. He decided not to lock the doors in case Sakichi came back. After climbing into his sleeping bag, Shinnosuke quickly fell asleep. The next time he woke up was when Santa screamed upon discovering Sakichi's dead body. Santa's story. Santa saw Sakichi leaving the hall as everyone started drifting off. Maybe he stepped outside to feel the cool night breeze. He thought, so he didn't bother calling out. After that, he saw Shinnosuke follow him outside. He remained half asleep, half awake, for a short while after. Dokusuke already seemed to be asleep by then. Finally, Shinnosuke returned alone. When he asked about Sakichi, Shinnosuke answered, "Who knows?" and laid down next to the doors. Santa also closed his eyes to go to sleep. When he woke up, Sakichi's dead body was right in front of him. A scream tore out of his throat before he even realized it. When Grandpa Dokusuke was done, I grabbed a piece of paper and pencil and started drawing up a chart. Even considering their testimonies separate from each other, the situation was so back and forth that it was hard to keep track of. I decided to piece it all together by writing it down chronologically. Niwa-kun and I jotted down what Grandpa Dokusuke had said in order. Finally, it was done. Night of the incident. First, Sakichi left the hall. Dokusuke, Shinnosuke, and Santa all confirmed. Second, Shinnosuke left the hall. Dokusuke and Santa confirmed. Third, Dokusuke fell asleep. Santa confirmed. Fourth, Shinnosuke returned to the hall. He didn't bolt the door. Santa confirmed. Fifth, Shinnosuke and Santa fell asleep. Sixth, Dokusuke woke up. Seventh, Sakichi returned to the hall. The bolt was locked. Dokusuke confirmed. Eighth, Dokusuke fell asleep again. Ninth, Santa discovered the dead body. Dokusuke-san, could you tell us more about the state you found Sakichi's body in? Niwa-kun asked politely. Grandpa Dokusuke nodded and closed his eyes. Perhaps he was trying to remember. Finally, he slowly began speaking. Sakichi was... Yes, he was slumped against the door, with the axe sticking out of his chest, and the floor nearby and his sleeping bag were covered in blood. And the three of you didn't have any blood on you? Niwa-kun asked. I remember that well. There was no blood on our clothes, the sleeping bags, or outside the hall. A mystery this perfect was rare. You could almost call this a true mystery. This was no detective story. It was truly a bizarre phenomenon. At any rate, supposing Sakichi-san was killed by a human, who on earth could have done it? What reason did they have for killing him? Perhaps there might have been an unknown reason for it. About the reason why Sakichi-san was killed. Maybe there wasn't a reason. It might have been the work of some weirdo lurking nearby. Grandpa Dokusuke cut me off. Maybe he couldn't bear the painful memories any longer. No, that's not it. I tried disagreeing with him. Well, there was no blood outside the hall, right? If someone really snuck into the hall without a reason, killed Sakichi-san without a reason, then his blood would have landed on them too, because the axe was sticking straight out of his chest. Niwa-kun nodded beside me. But you only found blood on the floor beside him and on his sleeping bag, meaning the murderer used that as a shield to stop his blood from splashing onto them. If the murder was done on a whim, I don't think the killer would have thought that far ahead. So, there had to be a reason for why they killed him. I see, Grandpa Dokusuke said with a dry sigh. It's true. Someone might have planned it beforehand. But if that's the case, then that makes it even harder to guess who. Who on earth would have a reason to want to kill Sakichi? I have some more questions, Niwa-kun added eloquently. When was Sakichi-san killed? Dokusuke-san, you didn't hear his screams? Yes, that's it! Grandpa Dokusuke slapped his knees. And it wasn't just me. Neither Shin-no-suke nor Santa heard Sakichi scream. That is strange, Niwa-kun said. The hall was a closed room when the murderer was there. A closed room? It means the room was completely sealed, Niwa-kun explained. A completely sealed room. Yeah. The hall had no windows, and the double doors were bolted shut. In that state, any screams or strange sounds would wake them up. So, was Sakichi-san really killed inside the sealed hall? Dokusuke-san, did you see Sakichi replace the lock once he came back? Niwa-kun asked, his tone trying to confirm the information. Yeah, I did, Grandpa Dokusuke said. Then, when the hall became a sealed room, Sakichi-san was alive. Then, Sakichi-san's dead body was found leaning against the door. Meaning, nobody left the hall after Sakichi-san died. And that means that he was killed inside the sealed room. Niwa-kun gave his well-reasoned conclusion. But that meant the killer was... Sakichi-san was killed inside the sealed room. And there were 3 other people in the sealed room with him. No, there were only 3 other people in there, which meant the killer was either Grandpa Dokusuke, Shinnosuke-san, or Santa-san. When I said this, Grandpa Dokusuke panicked. "Oi, you're gonna make me a suspect?" I thought for a moment and then shook my head. "No. If you did it, then I don't think you'd tell us the story to begin with. The killer had to be Shinnosuke-san or Santa-san." Grandpa Dokusuke seemed relieved. "Did either Shinnosuke-san or Santa-san have a reason to kill Sakichi-san? The killer had taken advantage of everyone falling asleep and then used the axe Grandpa Dokusuke brought to kill Sakichi-san." Wrapped in darkness, in the tiny old hall, while the boys slept peacefully, unawares, he brought down the razor-sharp axe. Bright red blood splattered everywhere. Just imagining it was a terrifying and horrifying sight. We sat in the oppressive silence, momentarily unable to speak. I didn't want to think about it any further. Niwa-kun no doubt felt the same way. They were boys the same age we were, but a murder had taken place several decades back. And not only a murder, but that of a friend. To tell you the truth, Grandpa Dokusuke finally broke the silence, his voice pained. I also thought the same thing at the time. His face stiffened. It was the first time I'd ever seen him look like that. I mean, you know, Sakichi was killed inside the closed hall. I didn't do it, so that meant it had to be either Shinnosuke or Santa. Sadness lingered in his voice. One of his friends killed another of his friends. That was beyond sad, beyond painful. If I had killed Niwa-kun with these hands, or if Niwa-kun killed me, I didn't want to think about it. I thought of every possibility, but I have no idea which of them it might have been. Grandpa Dokusuke said, and then sighed deeply. Maybe Sakichi really was attacked by the kiddo. Maybe it was more helpful to think of it that way. One of his friends was a killer, and their victim was another of his friends. If that were the case, then the kiddo would no doubt be a far better explanation to believe in. I understood how he felt. But which of them really was the killer? I found myself returning to the thought. No doubt about it, one of them must have done it. Let's try thinking about it again. For example, when they returned to the hall, Sakichi-san's body was gone. Was there something they could surmise from that? The killer had moved his body. If an animal had done it, there would have been tracks, and an animal wouldn't have taken the sleeping bags as well. And it was hard to think that someone other than the killer had done it as well. Someone just happened to reach the hall that morning, before Grandpa Dokusuke. They just happened to find Sakichi-san's dead body. For some reason, they hid his body. and then to remain silent about it all. It was just too unnatural. The killer, meaning Shinnosuke-san or Santa-san, moved Sakichi-san's body. Which meant, after they discovered the body and fled down the mountain, and before the three boys returned later that day, the killer had returned to the hall and moved the body. I thought up all sorts of possibilities. The killer was... There was no way to tell. Thinking about it, there was no way either of them could have done it. Shinnosuke-san was too weak to move the dead body. Santa-san didn't have enough endurance to go up and back down the mountain without a break. Neither of them could do it by themselves. But what if they had worked together? No, that wouldn't work. Shinnosuke-san was the only one who could make the return trip, and Santa-san was the only one who could move the body. One of the two. The killer was a single person, no doubt about it. But was that really it? Maybe there were other possibilities. The killer was... perhaps someone unexpected. My head churned with ideas. Niwa-kun suddenly declared something in a cold voice. I know who killed Sakichi-san. Really, Niwa-kun? Grandpa Dokusuke said, panting. Niwa-kun glanced at him, and then turned his glance to me, my eyes wide open, and then again he turned to face Grandpa Dokusuke, head on. Then he said point blank, It was you, Dokusuke-san. The killer was you. His voice was cold and emotionless. You're lying! That's a lie! I screamed in a trance. What are you saying, Niwa-kun? Grandpa Dokusuke finally said, as though he were in terrible pain. Several beads of sweat appeared on his wrinkled forehead. Niwa-kun ignored both of us and explained calmly. It's clear from the situation that neither a beast nor an outsider moved Sakichi-san's corpse. And while Shinnosuke-san mightn't have had the strength and Santa-san didn't have the endurance for it, neither of them could have hidden the body either. I understood that much. I had thought the same thing. But that night, there were 3 other people inside that hidden room with Sakichi-san, and 2 of them weren't the killer. 3 minus 2 is 1. Logically, the only person it could have been was you, Dokusuke-san. Niwa-kun said without hesitation. To be honest, I had briefly had the same thought. 3 minus 2 is 1. It was the natural conclusion. But Grandpa Dokusuke, he wasn't the type of person I could accuse because of simple math. He was the one who played with me when I couldn't make friends my own age. The one who taught me all sorts of cool things. There was no way that my kind Grandpa Dokusuke, who loved stories, could be a killer. It wasn't me. I didn't kill anyone. Grandpa Dokusuke's usual calm face twisted as he furiously denied it. After I descended the mountain until Shinnosuke called me, I was in my house the whole time. Plus, I had no reason to do it. Sakichi was my friend. I can't show you any evidence now, but how can you lie and say you were in the house the whole time? Same goes for the reason you killed him. You've had decades on your side. Grandpa Dokusuke's high-pitched scream shocked even me, but I took a step back from Niwa-kun as he unflinchingly attacked my grandfather. It really was impossible to know who a person truly was. Somehow, I felt like Grandpa Dokusuke's warm face was hiding the visage of a true killer. It was just like the saying goes, suspicion produces fear. Or maybe Niwa-kun was no different. Normally he was so handsome, yet with a slight twist of his lips, he looked like someone else entirely, like someone cold at heart. No, it wasn't just my imagination. That smile on his lips was the real him. The vulgar smile of someone making fun of us. Niwa-kun smiled contentedly, and in astonishment, I wiped a tear away and said, Grandpa Dokusuke wasn't the killer. What did Niwa-kun mean? Just as I thought he was trying to call Grandpa Dokusuke a killer, he retracted his statement. I was just making fun, he explained. His tone of voice suggested that he wanted to call us idiots for assuming otherwise. Because the killer was me. But the next words out of his mouth made no sense. What on earth are you talking about, boy? Grandpa Dokusuke said, sounding fed up. Naturally, of course. This all happened when he was the same age as us now. There was no way Niwa-kun could have done it. Hang on. What if... No way. I hoped I was just overthinking things. Niwa-kun started to speak, betraying my prayers. Gramps, when you saw Sakichi leaning against the doors of the hall, that was me. I changed into him. The real Sakichi was already dead by that point. His lips twisted into a smile. No, there's no way. You... Grandpa Dokusuke's face went pale. It's true. I am the kiddo. Liar! I screamed without thinking. Liar! You're lying! Niwa-kun was my friend. My first and only friend. There was no way he could have fooled me. And in such a cruel way to boot. Cruel? You're going to harm my reputation. Niwa-kun laughed scornfully, as though reading my thoughts. I revealed my true identity. You were just too stupid to realize it. Come on, remember my name. His name? Niwa Shirao. Ni-wa-shi-la-o. No way. Oniwarashi. Kiddo. Why did I never notice it before? Come to think of it, I'd never once gone to play at his house. I'd never even heard of anyone in the village being related to him. I honestly didn't know a single thing about him. Do you remember this? Niwa-kun produced an axe seemingly out of nowhere. It was covered in rust and looked heavy. Niwa-kun lifted the axe that had claimed Sakichi-san's life with ease in a single hand. So, it was Niwa-kun after all. Here, I'll give it back. The kiddo screamed. His thin right arm bent. The axe flew from his hand as he let go. It landed right in Grandpa Dokusuke's chest. He didn't even have time to scream. Grandpa Dokusuke slowly fell forward. Grandpa Dokusuke! As he fell over, I suddenly turned. I really shouldn't have. I met Niwa-kun. No, the kiddo's cold gaze. Laughter burst forth from his mouth. I sure had fun with you guys. There were traces of Niwa-kun, my only friend for the summer, left in that quiet laugh. As the kiddo laughed shrilly, a whirlwind kicked up, blowing past my side and out the window, heading towards Mount Onikobe. When I looked back, Grandpa Dokusuke was no longer moving. I heard crows crying, as though they were lamenting for the deaths of Sakichi-san, Grandpa Dokusuke, and even Niwa-kun. Their calls full of sorrow. On and on, forever.